So the lower dantian is super important in Tai Chi for many reasons. One that is commonly cited is that it's a place of energy cultivation. And so this is where you develop an area for storing your energy, your qi, and that's where you store it as you develop qi doing Taiji or standing pose qigong like Zhanzhuang qigong or stationary posture qigongs, taking movements of a form. All of those tie into building the lower dantian and filling it with energy. As that energy fills, then it can go to other parts of the body and basically supply the energy that's necessary to work on an internal martial arts level. In a more physical perspective, if we're thinking of this as a placeholder basically for our center of gravity, the reason this is so important is because I want to make sure that how I move supports this center of gravity, because that's going to keep me stable. If I move in a way where my center of gravity is hanging out back here and my feet are up here, it's going to change my structure. I'm going to have to lean forward, change how my body's structured, and make it very awkward to try to maintain this up here instead of letting it fall to the ground, which is what it's going to do without support. So all of the principles in Tai Chi, how you're supposed to move in Tai Chi, really tie into maintaining good support of how the center of gravity is controlled through motion. And what plays into that is we can think of the lower dantian as sort of the center of motion. So there's the saying in the Taiji classics, when one part of the body moves, all parts of the body move. Chen Xiaowang says that that's referring to this lower dantian. When this part moves, all parts move. So this is kind of the center of motion in the body. It's this idea of dantian centrality in Tai Chi practice. So we often think of the saying how power is generated in the feet, controlled in the waist, and manifest in the hands as saying that movement originates with the feet. And you can definitely think of it that way, because if your feet aren't in contact with the ground, the rest of you isn't going to go anywhere, right? If you are floating in midair and you try to walk forward, your feet not being in contact with the ground is going to prevent you from actually getting that center of gravity to locomote somewhere. So that is a reasonable perspective. I like to think of it this way. I like to think that this is the source of your movement and things move out from there. So rather than thinking of it as the foot is pushing the ground and pushing force up to the dantian, and the dantian is therefore moving, or the center of gravity is being moved by the foot pushing up, I like to think of the dantian, or the center of gravity, sending energy or pushing down, and that's what causes this to move as this pushes into a solid object such as the ground. From that same idea, with this downward force, you also have an upward force that comes up the spine and from there can go down the arms into the opponent or into whatever motion you're doing. So with that idea of dantian centrality, when the dantian moves, it sends that force down or it sends that force up, and there's always this counterbalance of up and down force, rather than thinking of force coming up through like a wave from the ground up and through the hands. Although at times it can be useful to think of that energy coming up from the ground through and out to the hands, I think that especially as you get further into your Tai Chi training, thinking of it as going down from the dantian and up from the dantian is going to be more useful in both your push hand skills and your solo form training. So now that we've had that aside of talking a little bit about the dantian and why it's important as a placeholder for the center of gravity of the body and how it relates to our movement of the body, it's really important as our placeholder of the center of gravity to maintain control of that. And I got into that a little bit with making sure your stance is correct and your posture is correct so you can support it. But it's really, really important also whenever you're interacting with something else. So that can be a partner doing push hands training, or that can be anything that you do in your daily life, whether that's opening a door, pushing a chair, carrying groceries, you name it. You want to make sure that the way that your body relates to that object that you're in contact with is supported by maintaining your center of gravity well. And the reason that's important is because if this is compromised, then the control of your balance is compromised. And that's one of the primary objectives in training push hands, is to learn how to relate and control what's happening with this in relation to other forces acting on your body. And while you can learn that to some extent with solo form training, push hands is really where that training comes into full play. And it's really where you actually develop the control of the dantian and incorporating that with the principles of Tai Chi. So we've discussed that it's really important to maintain the control of your own dantian. But if you are in a partner practice situation such as push hands, your goal, first of all, is to maintain this. Your secondary goal is to try to reach through this person's body by using their frame, using the contact points that you have with them, and control where this is, because by doing that you can control their balance. You control their center of gravity, and therefore you control their balance, and that's how you get the person off balance, is by controlling this. So now let's talk about how this plays into this idea of relaxation and blocking your opponent's control of your body. I don't know if you can distinguish the colors very well, but I'm using orange for this guy in the darker clothing, I'm using green for this guy in the lighter clothing, and I'm hoping you can see that okay in the video. So in order for this guy to push with maximum force into his opponent, he really needs to put his center of gravity into play, and he needs to make sure that this is pushing force down and pushing force up. And we're not necessarily talking about Tai Chi, we're just talking about if he's pushing as hard as he can, his center of gravity, his core is really going to come into play with connecting what's happening with the lower half of his body into his objective of pushing forward. Now in Tai Chi you have this force that's generated downward, straight down here, and then you have this force coming down here. And that's supporting the force that's coming up his spine, and then at about shoulder blade level, about shoulder height, is being transferred down his arm into his opponent. And so we know that this that's going on, the purpose of this is to find a path through his body to his lower dantian so that he can control and disrupt his balance. So we're going to say this guy in the lighter colored clothing is newer. So all he's feeling is getting pushed, and he does not want to fall over. So what is the normal reaction? The normal reaction is to tense up the entire body and lock every part of this body to that lower dantian. So basically what he does is he locks, and this, he would change his structure. He would lean in, he would push really hard, and you would see that through his whole body. But what you would see is solid lines of force coming here, coming down to his legs, we'll say like this. And what that does is that creates a path for this guy. So all of his tension, what it's accomplished is it has created these lever points. Basically, he's created a huge lever that allows this guy to gain control of the lower dantian, and through that disrupt what's going on with his feet and uproot him. So when he applies his force, that force has a path to travel down. It says, oh, I can go this way, right down here, and then here I go. I have control of the lower dantian. Once this is controlled, then as you move this person off of their base, then the feet are affected because they're locked into this motion too. Go all the way down here. So all of this is locked in, and he has a direct line of force to control this and uproot this. So now he controls his lower dantian, or he controls his center of gravity, which means he controls his balance. So the problem with tension when you're practicing Tai Chi is not that it's just bad, because that's one of the things that's bad when you're doing Tai Chi. You just don't want tension. There's a reason behind it, a very important reason, and that is to break this line that controls your center of gravity. If you have tension, you create this direct force line, basically, where if he pushes on the arm, it connects to this straight up and down force line. If he pushes on the core of the body, it connects straight down, and everything is locked in place. So this guy you can think of as basically a plank of wood like this. So when he pushes in, it just tips. The whole thing is locked in place, and so it tips, right? The whole thing moves as one unit. And if he can find the correct point to leverage, then he's just going to be able to leverage off of wherever he's locked into his stance. He could probably leverage off that back foot and just push this guy right on over. So now let's think about, this guy's been training a while now, and he's learned to let go of this tension. He's learned to not give this guy a direct line of force to his lower dantian. So what happens then?